everyone, and welcome to Amateur Endeavors, where we live life for the love of it. Today we are going to be sewing a circle skirt. The last couple of videos have been a little wordy, a lot about what I think, different opinions and point of views, but now we're getting into the fun stuff. Projects, craft projects, sewing projects, all the projects. Today we are going to be starting a series of different videos about how to sew different types of skirts. Skirts are a very fun and easy, quick project that you can do, and some of them are super duper simple, and others can get a little bit more complicated, but they're still pretty easy to do, while also being super cute and super fun. To start with the simplest and easiest of skirts to sew, and that is the circle skirt. Now, circle skirts are very simple, very versatile. You can add, you can subtract different elements to give them interest. It's like you can add ruffles, you can add layers, you can add a petticoat underneath for fullness. So you can make it in different colors, different lengths. Very, very versatile if you have a basic understanding of how to make them. And that's what we're going to do today. I'm going to show you a basic circle skirt, and I think I'm going to add a ruffle onto the end of mine just for a little bit of added interest. But we're going to start with a basic pattern, and I can show you some of the ways that you can add and subtract things.
Alright, so before we go making our skirt, first we need to make a pattern for our skirt. And in order to do that, we're going to need 3 basic measurements. The first is going to be our waist measurement. That is the smallest point on our torso. And I'm going to mark that waist right up there. And then the next we're going to need is our hip measurements. And that's kind of the opposite. It's the widest part of our torso, right around our hip bones. And the next one that we're going to need is we're going to need the length for our skirt. And that measurement is just going to be from either our waist or our hips, where we want our skirt to sit, all the way until where we want our skirt to end. I want mine to go pretty low to the floor, so it's going to go pretty long. I'm just writing in my own measurements here, please don't judge, but this is just to help give an example of how you would use these measurements to make your pattern. Okay, now that we have our measurements, we're going to make our pattern. And the pattern for a circle skirt is pretty simple. You start with the shape that is about a quarter of a circle, more on that later, but it's going to have 2 long lines and then 1 curved, and then we're going to do another quarter circle up in the corner. And we're going to need a couple of measurements for that. First is going to be this one that's going to help create the waist portion of our skirt, and then there's going to be this long one here, and that's just going to be our length of the skirt, so however long you want it to be. So I'll go ahead and write in 40 here, and that's going to be how long I want it, but now we need this one, and in order to get that we need to do a bit of math. I know, I tricked you. You thought you were getting a fun sewing video, and here I am making you do math. But this is pretty easy. So what you're going to do is you're going to find the radius of a circle using the circumference. And you can just look this up on your phone, but if not, basically all you need is you need your waist measurement, that's the circumference, and then you divide that by 2 times pi. And so pi is 3.14 generally, and so 2 times that is 6.28, and then you can just use a calculator. 38 divided by 6.28 is going to be somewhere around 6 inches. And that, if we were using a zipper, that would be the only measurement we would need for up there. But since I'm going to be using an elastic instead, I need to make sure that the waist measurement is wide enough to get over my hips, and maybe even have a little extra. So I'm actually going to bump this up all the way to 50 as the circumference, but same deal, you just take 50 divided by 6.28, and then that gets me somewhere roughly in the ballpark of 8 inches. And with that, we have all of the measurements we need to make the main piece of our circle skirt. We'll still need to make a waistband and a ruffle, but we'll talk more about that later. But besides that, we have our main piece, and now it's time to go get some fabric. Now, normally this would be the point where I would go to my local thrift store and find some bed sheets or curtains, but all of my thrift stores are completely out of pretty much any linens, and it is quite unfortunate, but hey, it is what it is. So instead, I went to my local Walmart and I picked out a set of bed sheets. They have lots of different colors and patterns, but I settled on this red set, and I think it's going to look really cute. Now that we have our fabric, it is now time to cut out our pattern. So what you're going to do first is you're going to take your piece of fabric and you're going to fold it into quarters. Basically what you're going to do is you're going to fold it one way and then the other, so it's folded up sort of like a napkin. And it's going to be a lot of fabric, but it's what you need in order to get a skirt with no seams in it, and so, kind of worth it. But once you have it folded, you're going to lay it down on the ground, and you're going to have these two sides here, and they are the sides that don't have open ends. They are all folded, and you're going to connect those two on a curve. Now we're going to go and take our measurement, and this is our radius of our waist plus the length of our skirt. I went back and checked my measurements. I didn't need 40, I in fact needed 30, but I'm going to measure 38 inches all the way around from that corner, connecting the two folded sides. And I'm just going to go around, making sure to keep my measuring tape straight and making notches as I go. And now I have this perfect curve. And then we're also going to take our radius that we found earlier, so that's going to be 8 inches, and we're going to do the same thing from the same corner. Just making marks along the line, making a perfect curve from that corner, right here. And after we have that all marked out, we can just cut it out, and this will create a perfect circle, and it's going to be the main body of our skirt. Pretty simple. So because I want to put a ruffle at the bottom of the skirt, I'm going to need a little extra fabric. So I am going through and I am pulling the elastic out of the fitted sheet of the bed set. It's a little bit tedious, but it's not really that difficult. You just get a seam ripper and you pull out the edges, yanking it apart as you go, making sure not to hurt yourself. And then you take the corners and you rip those out as well. They're usually pretty frail seams, all things considered, so you can kind of just take them with your hands and pull them apart. Unless you have a particularly stubborn seam like I did here, in which case you're going to have to get it started with the seam ripper, and then you can yank it apart. But this will just make sure that you have a nice flat piece to work with when you're cutting out those next bits of fabric.
Alright, now we have ripped out all the outside edge seams of our fitted sheet. It's a pain, but we needed to do it because now we have a flat piece of fabric that we are going to use to make the ruffle at the bottom of our skirt. I didn't have enough fabric in the flat sheet because that went all into the circle skirt itself, so that's why we are doing this. It's a little tedious, but now I got extra fabric and free elastic. I don't know if I probably won't use this elastic for this project. It's a little thin for that, but real stretchy. Probably use it at some point. And now with all the curved cuts out of the way, we can now finally employ my favorite method of getting fabric out, and that is to simply notch it and rip. It always gets it straight every single time. And so when you're needing 200 inches of straight fabric, 8 inches wide, yeah, I'ma do it this way. Much faster than So much faster. Now I'm going to cut out one piece 8 inches wide and then see how long that is, and then that will help me figure out how many sections of the sheet I need to make the whole 200 inches. Alright, so I was able to get away with only having to rip 2 panels. It was 85 inches wide, and so I only needed technically 192. I rounded up to 200 because I like rounding out, but 2 panels gets me 190 inches, and so I think that is close enough. They're 85 inches each, and I'm not going to go and I'm not going to make a little piece that's only 10 inches long. Not going to do it. So, we have our two 8-inch pieces for our ruffle, and the only other piece that we need to make is going to be our waistband. So that one should be pretty simple. It'll be a nice little rectangle. It'll be the same width. It'll be the length of the circumference of our inner circle. So that is going to be our waist measurement generally, but for mine it's going to be my waist measurement plus extra, so that way I can get it over my hips and it'll just elastic back in again. So I'll check my measurements and check what I wrote down for it, but that will be the length, and then the width will just be however thick we want it times 2 plus seam allowance. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay, let's do it. Okay, so I was just reviewing my math. I was thinking about doing a pleat instead of a ruffle at the very bottom of it, so it would be, folds over instead of gathers like normal. I've been having some trouble with gathers. I haven't been wanting to do gathers as much lately, so I was thinking about doing a pleat. And pleat is 3 times the amount of fabric that is 3 times the amount of fabric you need for just a solid panel, but I thought I had enough. So I was reviewing my math, and I made 2 mistakes. Number 1, I forgot to include the inner part of the circle skirt when measuring the circumference of my circle. I measured it as 30, but that's just the length of the skirt. There's also that 8 inches of extra that we cut off in order to make the hole for me to exist in. Also, I only did the circumference once. Even if I were doing a ruffle instead of a pleat like I am now planning to do, I would need at least double of that. So I cut out 2 panels for that ruffle. I will need at least 4 in order to do a ruffle. But if I want to do a pleated ruffle instead of a gathered ruffle, then I will need 8. So all that extra fabric from that fitted sheet is now going to go into the ruffle, because I need a grand total of 715 inches of fabric in order to do this ruffle. Alright, so now we have cut out 8 panels, 8 inches wide, 85 inches long, and since our circumference is 238 inches around, and this is a grand total of 680 inches, we should have enough to do our pleats. And if not, then by the time I am done with all of this, I will scream. This was supposed to be a simple book. And it is simple, it's just a lot of fabric. But now we have cut out all the fabric we need, so all we need to do now is sew it together, put it together. And since it is mostly just a skirt, a waistband, and a ruffle, there's actually not that many pieces. That's a lot of pieces, but it's just squares sewn together into a long line. So it shouldn't be that bad. Okay, so before we get into all the mess with the ruffle, we are going to start with the waistband. The waistband should be fairly simple. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to take this piece that we cut out It is 4 inches wide, it is 50 inches long, and that should go around the inside circle of our circle skirt. Now, I didn't show it in previously, but when we cut out our circle skirt, it made a perfect circle around with a perfect circle in the center. And what we are going to do first is we are going to take our waistband piece and we are going to sew it to itself. Now, some fabrics are going to have a right or a wrong side depending on whether or not you have a pattern, or sometimes colors show up better on one side versus the other. But this is a bed sheet, and so it doesn't really have a right or a wrong side, so it doesn't matter what sides I sew together so long as I make sure all seams are on the inside. But first thing we're going to do is we are going to sew this to itself and make sure that it creates an enclosed circle, and then we are going to sew this to that inner circle we made on our skirt piece. Alright, now we have pinned the waistband to the skirt, right sides together. Now, the only part of this that has a right side is going to be the waistband, because the minute you add a seam to it, that becomes the wrong side. Where the extra bits are and not the flat seam, that's your wrong side. So, wrong side is facing out, right side is facing in towards the skirt, and we are going to sew along this edge. So I normally do a 1/2 inch seam simply because it gives you enough room if your fabric frays, or if you'd like, you can once you sew it, you can fold the hem in on itself and then sew that over again, and that will make sure that you have no frayed edges at all. I'm not usually that patient unless I have something that I really think is going to fray a lot, but you can if you want to, and 1/2 inch gives you enough space to where you can get a 1/4 inch in and then sandwich to itself. All that to say, let's sew these pieces together. Okay, so now that our skirt is fully attached to our waistband, the next thing we're going to need is elastic. I have already cut out my piece. Essentially what you need is you need your waist measurement minus a couple of inches. The more inches you take off, the tighter the elastic will be once you put it on. I've got a waist of 38, and so I did 33. You're also going to have to make some room for seam allowance because you're going to be joining this together, and that is what I'm going to do next. Make sure that you have a very secure seam on there. Go over it at least twice, if not more. I normally do an X with the edges sewn down, just to make sure that it does not come apart while it's inside your waistband where you can't fix it without taking the whole thing apart. That isn't going anywhere. Now we need to put it into our waistband. And the way that we are going to do that is that we are going to put it along the edge of what we just sewed. Now we're going to put it along the edge of what we just sewed, and then we're going to take the fabric, fold it over so that way it's wrapped entirely around in the waistband, and then do a slight hem, and so on the inside it is tucked under, up inside the seam, and we're just going to sew along this edge and make sure everything's wrapped up and tight. But before I do that, I am going to tack my elastic down in two places just to make sure that the elastic isn't moving all around and everywhere while I have it on. I don't know if you've ever had an elastic in a skirt before, but sometimes they can get twisted up, and that's usually because they're just free floating within the waistband. But if you tack them down in place, then they won't get twisted up as easily. Alright. So here is a closer look at what I was just talking about. So we have our skirt piece, and then we have our waistband piece, and our elastic tacked into place just above the line that we just sewed. And what we're going to do is we're going to lay down the elastic along that line, take our waistband, fold it over about a 1/4 inch, and then wrap it around the elastic to just under it. And we are going to sew right along this edge, just underneath the elastic. If we catch the elastic, it could throw our sewing machine out of whack, and it will also prevent it from gathering and cinching correctly. So you need to go just under it so where you don't catch it, but just a small line connecting the waistband to the other side of the waistband, so that way the elastic is sandwiched in the middle. Alright, so the tricky part about all of this is that because the elastic is smaller than the waistband itself, as you are sewing, you can't really pin the whole thing into place because it's hard to get around a elastic that's constantly trying to bring everything closer together when you want to stretch it out and lay it flat. So you kind of have to work slowly and meticulously to just kind of move around the waistband and let it stretch in other places while the portion that you're working on lays flat. Just be careful, just take your time, and trust me, it'll look good. Alright, and with that, we now have a fully enclosed waistband. So, inside, outside, inside, outside. But that just makes sure that everything's fully enclosed, that the elastic can move around mostly freely except for those 2 points that we tacked it down to make sure it doesn't twist it on itself, because that can be annoying. So if we weren't adding the ruffle at the bottom, the only thing we would have to do to the skirt to finish it would be to hem it. Which is why I believe that a circle skirt is one of the simplest, most beautiful things that you can make when sewing, because it's literally so easy. You've got a circle, you've got a waistband, you've got an elastic. That's it. A lot of basic, simple stuff, but it makes something that's so pretty and so flowy and just a twirly skirt, and it's so fun. But that being said, we will in fact be adding a ruffle to the bottom of this, which is going to take quite a bit of fabric, but we're going to get started on it. Okay, the next part of our process is going to be tedious but easy. So we have 8 panels of fabric that we've got to sew together to make one very, very long panel that's going to go along the bottom of our skirt. So we basically have to go through and we have to sew panel to panel to panel while making sure that all the seams are on the same side. If you have a seam that's on the outside, then that means when you attach it to the skirt, you're going to have one weird seam that's just hanging out. We don't want that. So one after the other, we're sewing these things together very carefully. We don't want to have to take things out and have to redo them again. Alright, now all the panels are sewed together and all the seams are on the right side. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to hem this ahead of time. Because the skirt is so big and has so much fabric attached to it, it's actually easier to hem a single panel than it is attached to the whole skirt with all of these little ruffles and all that jazz. So we're going to do that now before we ever attach it to the skirt. Let's see, not sure exactly how basic your knowledge is of sewing and whatnot, but a hem is just you roll it over and then you roll it over again so that way the raw edge is tucked away inside so it doesn't fray or get anywhere. But super easy. It's gonna take me a while though because I have several yards of fabric here. But that's okay. It'll look good. It'll be worth it. Because ruffles are adorable. You want to see a magic trick? Just keeps going. That was a lot. That was a lot of fabric. But it is all hemmed. Now we just have to attach it to the skirt. Now that, unfortunately, is also going to be a rather long, tedious process because it's going to be place, fold, place, fold, place, fold, so on and so forth. But we're almost done. Just remember, make sure that right sides are together. So that means the unfolded edge of your hem matches up with the right side of your circle skirt. You do not want to take all of this out and have to do it all over again. Trust me.
Pleats are really simple, they're just kind of tedious. So essentially all they are is you just take the fabric and you fold it over and then you sew it down. So this is me just taking it and I'm folding it up towards my sewing foot just to make sure that it catches immediately and doesn't shift as I'm sewing it. And I'm doing 1 inch pleats roughly. I'm not really measuring, but I am doing this over and over and over again, and I will for the entirety of the skirt.
Okay, that was a lot. I am 100% sure that I did that fold more than 192 times, because that is so many pleats, but it is finally finished. Okay, so I think that turned out pretty well. I think that the skirt is darling. I like it. I like how full it is. I like the ruffle that I ended up doing on the bottom. I think it's very cute and can be worn casually, or if I dress it up with a nicer top, it can be more formal. But I just think it's a very simple and very cute skirt. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a little something along the way, and maybe you can make your own circle skirt someday too. And if not, we've got other options that are coming soon, and I hope later you'll join me for those as well. Until next time, live life full of love. Bye. Where were you the night of the 10th.